Bonjour tout le monde, bonjour Montréal. Je suis ravi de vous voir, but I think we probably have to continue in English. Actually, I'm not going to talk much about smart cities. I want to talk to you about something more serious. We have a problem, Montreal. We have a problem. And it is one for which you are very suited. Just a few words on me. My early career was in Europe. I'm British. I'm an engineer. First job was at CERN in Geneva, building what was then the Big Particle Accelerator, and then going back to England, working with a medical imaging group on the first MRI scanner, and then 30 years or so with IBM. I retired about 18 months ago. And what I did for IBM, I was very lucky. I was able to have a 30-year career doing internal startups. Kind of thing that you do, but you don't have a choice of sponsor. So I retired from there, so anything I say now doesn't really reflect IBM. It's just Colin Harrison speaking here. What would you think if someone asked you what is the world's greatest innovation ever? Huh? Good, good. Well, it isn't Facebook, it isn't the internet, it isn't semiconductors, it isn't electricity, it isn't steam engines, any of those kinds of things. Yeah. Language keeps coming up here. There's a trend I can see. For me, at least, the answer to that question is it's a city. Not Montreal specifically, but the idea of cities in general. Cities are places that allow large numbers of people to come together. We'll talk a little bit about why they do that. But one of the consequences of those people coming together is they bump into one another. If you lived in the country, your probability of bumping into 100 people in a given day is probably pretty low. But in a city, it's very easy to do that kind of thing. And from those bumping events, we get all kinds of innovation. When I talk about innovation here, I don't just mean sort of the positive innovation that you're looking for. It also brings the negative innovation. It brings really creative approaches to crime as well. But cities produce innovation. The oldest written story that has come down to us is a collection of stories, actually, called the Epic of Gilgamesh. They go back about 3,000 years, and they concern the activities of Gilgamesh, who was a leader, a king, perhaps, in an area that we'd call Mesopotamia probably today. And someone actually corrected me just this morning. Gilgamesh did not actually build this city of Uruk. The city existed. But what Gilgamesh did was he built a wall around the city of Uruk. And his purpose in building the wall was to separate a space from the wilderness. So prior to cities like Uruk being built in that era, the majority of people lived in nomadic tribes wandering around within a given territory. And settlements began to form. But what Gilgamesh wanted to do here was to have a very strong division between the wilderness and the wildness of people, and a space in which, instead of doing natural Darwinism, they could do social Darwinism. They could compete not based on their ability to hunt, but on their ability to generate ideas, to create value in communities, to collaborate, to share knowledge, to generate knowledge. And that is a large part then of the strength of the city. We seem to like to live in cities. If we go back to that era, the vast majority of people were still living on the land. And even well into the 18th century, a large fraction, more than 90% of the world's population lived on the land because that's what it took to produce food. In the last 200 years, though, there's been this trend, an accelerating trend, towards living in cities. Until in 2005, we crossed that magic mark, and more than 50% of the world's population was estimated to live in an urban environment of some kind. And the projection is by the end of this century, that number would probably go to 80% or more. So why is it we like to live in cities? What is it that impels us to do this? For some reason, we feel compelled to come and live in cities. And people come and live in search of all kinds of things. They come in search of jobs, of mates, of entertainment, of new opportunities. Generally, I talk about this in terms of improving quality of life. I have no idea what quality of life is, but it's something that people seem to like to improve. And even people who come to cities like Nairobi and live in slums feel that they are improving their quality of life. And this is in general a good thing. We want gradually to lift people out of extreme poverty, and this is the way that it works. Economists, researchers in general, but economists, when they study cities, look at many different properties of a city. It's wages, it's productivity, it's GDP, many of the positive aspects. They also look at the negative aspects, things like crime, disease, pollution, waste, liquid and solid waste. And if you look at how those kinds of properties scale with the size of a city, you get some very interesting relations. So we're looking at properties that are proportional to the population of a city raised to some power. Call that the exponent. And if it were a linear relationship, that exponent would be 1. What you actually find when you do this is that that exponent is not 1 in general. It varies for sublinear scaling to around, say, 0.85, and to superlinear scaling typically to about 1.15. Now, those don't sound like very strong exponents, but when you scale from 30,000 people to 30 million people, right, you get a very strong dependency coming out of that. So here's a couple of examples. So here is road miles. These are USA, metropolitan statistical areas. Road miles versus log population. So these are log-log plots, log base 10. The black line shows you what you would get with a linear exponent here. These lines are best fits to the actual data that you can collect here. What this shows is that as you go from around 10,000 people up to best part of 10 million people, that you get a sublinear scaling around 0.8. And so by the time you get up to 10 million people or so, you've got the best part of half an order of magnitude difference in the number of road miles per person in a city. In other words, big cities need far less space and far less investment in infrastructure for roads than small cities do. The other extreme is GDP, gross domestic product. Again, here's the black line showing a linear dependence, and here is the data showing that you've got also now a superlinear scaling. In other words, people in big cities are more productive. They generate more wealth than people in small cities. This is why people come to cities. It's also why prices are high in cities as well. But this is the kind of thing that economists study. One of the things we would like to be able to study is what do those lines, those curves, look like for innovation? Now, the problem is innovation is a very difficult thing to measure, right? Even in the community and gathered here. Quantitative information on innovation is really hard. So one of the proxies that people use are inventions. Now, inventions are a really very poor proxy, and I've had many arguments with economists about why this is so, but the data is freely available. This is US patents. This is, again, log-log plots, but this time to base E, natural logs. And this is showing, this is showing the scaling of the number of patents versus population here. And now you see our exponent here, 1.26, right? Far bigger than we were seeing for the sublinear scaling of roads or the superlinear scaling of GDP. It appears, at least measured by patents, that cities are incredibly more productive when they grow large, right? And this is precisely why you are here, right? You congregate in cities of this kind because probability of creating an innovation is much larger. I was talking at breakfast this morning with a gentleman from Charlottetown on the very, very east edge of Canada, out on Prince Edward Island, who is running a wonderful company that teaches people how to speak languages. and he is living in a house that apparently doesn't exist. It's a very solitary place that he lives in, and he's been very fortunate to be able to live that kind of life. My guess is he would not have invented that company in that location. He invented it because he was living somewhere else. He's very fortunate that because of the internet and many other things, he can actually run it from out there. So are you with me so far? Cities are important because they bring millions of people together. Millions of people together create lots of innovation. We have a problem, Houston. Right? I will call this the urbanization challenge. Urbanization is this trend over the last years for people to gather increasingly in cities. As far as we can tell, it will continue for a long time. Probably will never reach 100%. It's possible that it might stabilize well below that, but at the moment the expectation is that during this century, a very, very large fraction of the total population will be living in cities. So today we have around 3 or 4 billion people living in things that we would recognize as cities. Every week, another 200,000 people join them around the world. Incredible number. That's a decent-sized small city every week coming into cities. We will also see the population continue to grow. If those people were not moving into cities, it would actually grow much stronger. People in cities, again, sublinear scaling, have fewer children than people living in the countryside generally. Agricultural communities typically have very large fertility. Consequence here is, though, that we're not sure that we're going to be able to feed those people, that we will have enough water, drinking water for those people, that we will have enough minerals for the industries that they will be working in. This is the challenge. Of course, there's the environmental aspects of this as well. But there's an implicit assumption in the way that the world is headed today that somewhere in the next 50 years we are going to find innovations that will solve this problem. You are the people who are going to do that. Okay. You and others around the world are the people who are going to figure out how we are going to change our ability to produce those resources and also our demands per capita for those resources as well. What we don't understand at the moment is whether the rate of production of innovation that we have is going to be sufficient to close that gap. This is a topic that I'm involved with a number of universities on, trying to understand how birth rates and economics and technological innovation come together over the next 50, 60 years to produce a society that will be stable in that time. There was an article 2 or 3 weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal that I just happened to pick up when I was in Berlin, I think, at the time, on innovation peaks. Here is it's taken from a book called The American Technological Challenge by Jan Weig, and it's showing inventions per year. And you notice these are not millions, these are units of inventions. And what he is measuring here are what he calls macro inventions. So the steam engine would be a macro invention. The computer would be a macro invention. And over the last 200 years, what he's estimating is that there are about 100, maybe 200 such macro inventions. What he's pointing to is that since around 1970, the number of macro inventions has been declining significantly. Inventions, patents, yeah, it's going gangbusters, right? But new major inventions of this kind, we seem to be slowing down on. That's a concern. That's a concern because that is probably the area in which we will need to solve this innovation gap. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem here, right? This is one that I hope you will be engaged on in the years to come, probably well after I'm left this planet. And I think that you are a very creative community. I think that you will find ways to solve this. And I hope that by the end of this century, we will have a world that is able to support this stable population and move into that good future. So, je vous invite, je vous remercie Thanks a lot. If you have questions, we can we take maybe one or two now, and then I'll be around the next 2 days. I see one hand up in the very back here, this gentleman.
Two questions. The first is, can I have the presentation on a USB key? The second is, do you think people need to understand the law of physics to be able to work on the response to give to those problems?
So the first question was, can we have this on the wiki? I hope so. I don't control that. The organizers control that, but if you find me in the break sometime, we can exchange emails and we can certainly share it that way. There's nothing very proprietary about what you've seen here. The other question is, do we need to understand laws of physics? Yes. It's hard to do a lot of solid work if you don't understand basic laws of physics. I do have concerns about the state of scientific education in schools these days. But I don't think we'll get very far if we don't have that.
Can you talk about, you mentioned patents versus innovation, how they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
You talk about your thoughts on how patents are accelerating or constraining innovation that will save us?
So patents, I have some friends in academia who are trying to build patent maps to understand where there are holes in those gaps, and then what would it mean if you could fill in those gaps. So think of patents as a kind of a tree structure where these macro patents are the major branches, and then we get down to twigs and leaves and then whatever is beyond a leaf. And it's very easy, and I'm guilty of quite a lot of this myself, right? At the leaf level, it's very easy to see a new combination that would be patentable. And in some parts of industry, this is having a very adverse effect, that people are generating patents that A, clog up the patent systems, and B, act as essentially barriers to innovation because they essentially fence off some piece of that tree space that isn't particularly valuable but gets in the way. I'm not really talking about whether you put rounded corners on the phone or not. I'm talking about a little bit more substantive features than that. Because a lot of those patents, by the way, are design patents. They're not what I would really think of as inventions. But it is a mechanism that certainly gets corporations engaged in the invention process. And IBM, as an example, has been very proud for, I don't know where we are these days, 16, 17 years or so, of having the largest number of information technology patents issued in the United States every year. So it does stimulate invention, creation, but I'm not sure that it's really creating the kind of macro or leading towards the kind of macro invention or innovation that we need. Do we have time for one more question?
Just to build on that last point,
Yep.
I mean, are we seeing the role of business being taken over by the universities when they're moving away from tech transfer, moving away from pure science into tech transfer and needing to make sure that everything is publishable and patentable and less focus on the absolute pure science?
Yeah, this is a process that goes back 30 or more years when the university first starting to realize that intellectual property actually has economic value, financial value as well. I wouldn't necessarily want to criticize universities for doing that. There are other things I could criticize them for more. But I think one of the things, and if I were to talk about smart cities, one of the things that I'm actually more into these days is what we're calling open cities, which is this notion of essentially devolution, of deconstruction of large organizations like a municipal government or indeed corporations into much smaller units. And I would that's why I'm very encouraged by seeing so many startups here. I'm very encouraged to think that grassroots innovation, if I can call startups doing grassroots, that is a very fertile area. It is the problem with large institutions is they have many vested interests, and in a startup you may have some vested interests, but not very many, and so you have much greater freedom. I spent a lot of time in IBM and working with IBM's customers, trying to be an innovator, whatever you think that is, primarily in areas where I wasn't an expert, and my job was to be the ignorant person who would ask the stupid question. Because the stupid question is frequently the one that gets you around some mental barrier that is institutionalized there. I think I should probably stop at this point. I thank you all very much. I hope you have a fabulous 2 days. Bye-bye.